Hey guys, today we're going to be creating some custom checkboxes and radio buttons using CSS. Right now on the right hand of the screen in the browser, we just have the default radio buttons. So to start, I have an index HTML folder. Inside of there, I have a link to a style sheet, which I have opened over here with some just basic styles. Inside of the head, I also have a link to Roboto font from Google, just to make things look a little prettier. I have a div class of container, which is containing all of the elements on the screen currently. I have a heading, simple heading with the title and just some form elements to give these some space. And inside of there, we just have a checkbox with a checkbox label of checkbox 1 and just two radio elements which are related by name here, just test. So moving forward, in the styles.css, I just have a simple reset. I'm also setting the box sizing to border box on all the elements in the page here. In the body, just have the background to an off-white and setting the font family to Roboto. Simple container with some padding to keep it off the edges of the screen. I also have the heading styles here and that margin bottom 1em for the form elements to give it that spacing we were talking about. Also have this zoomed in at about 200. Let's go ahead and give it a little bit more. Hopefully you guys can see this okay on your screens. So to handle checkboxes, we can't really style out the default checkboxes that the browser gives us. So what we're going to do is create some fake checkboxes, and we're going to use the checked pseudo element state of the checkbox here to be able to target that and add the check mark and styles that we need. So let's go ahead and get started. Here at the top, I'm just going to go ahead and just quickly make a big comment just to separate out the areas that we're going to be working here. Checkbox, and we'll also go radio. So we have two sections here, and we're going to start with the checkbox. So to begin, what we're going to need to do is target. We're going to be using the before and after pseudo elements to create the checkbox and the check mark. So the before element will be the checkbox, and the after pseudo element will we'll create a check mark with CSS and overlap the checkbox. So to start, we want to target the input of type is equal to checkbox, and what we're going to use here is this plus sign here, which is basically just going to select the next sibling element with the element tag of label. That's what we're going to start with grabbing here. And we're actually, before we even grab the label, we're going to start by just grabbing the before element here, or creating a before pseudo element. And we're going to use content. Now content we can use to insert some data into the HTML page through our CSS. So let's just go and type test in here and come back over to the browser and refresh. And you can see in front of the checkbox 1 label, we actually are getting this test text showing up. Now if we leave this as a blank string, we're actually going to still have the element there, and we can do anything we really want with it. But it won't actually show the text there. So it's still there, and if we can ensure that by inspecting in here. We have this before element. Now it's got no width or height really, we can't see anything, but we can start making adjustments to it. So we're going to create the checkbox. So to start with that, let's go ahead and start by giving it a display inline block, because we're going to give it a height and a width, and we want this to still be in line with the label. So inline block will work, and we can set the width and the height how we would like. We're going to set a width to just 1em and a height to 1em. Now if we refresh that, or actually let's go ahead and just give it a background so we can see this too, or let's get it, we'll give it a border. What we're going to use for the border is we're just going to do one pixel, but we're going to be sticking with M's throughout this tutorial. And the reason why is because with these elements, we want them to be scalable based off of like a parent form element. Say solid, and we're going to go ahead and give it a border of black. So let's go ahead and refresh. Now we can actually see it. That is the before element there, and let's just give it some space as well. We're going to give this 4 pixels to the right, so we're going to go 0.25 em. We'll save that. We'll hit a refresh here, and that gives us a little bit of some space there on the right. So now next we want to align these vertically centered. So we'll just go ahead and copy this without the before. So we'll select the label and we will set this to display flex. And now that we've got it, well, actually we'll assign it to inline flex. So we still want to keep that inline property. And we will align items center, and let's go ahead and refresh that and see what that does. Now that aligns is centered, but one thing that we do want to look at here is that if we're hovering over this element, we're kind of getting, like you can see, like a small, let's zoom it in a little bit more actually, maybe this will make it more sense. If you guys can see it, we're still getting a little bit above that fake checkbox we created, a little bit of blue space there above and below it. Now when we make the checkbox, we're going to set that to a position of absolute. And we're going to vertically center that based off of the label's height. So this will actually, this is something we want to get rid of. And we'll just set the line height to 1, which will give us more of a predictable result with the positioning, with when we position this absolute. So you can actually see that there's no more blue space above and below. And since we're going to be positioning that absolute, let's go ahead while we're here and put this position to relative so that we can position the pseudo element to that. So before we begin on the check mark, we'll do one more thing. We'll go ahead and just copy this, give some space here, and we'll just set this to checked. And we're going to go ahead and set the background of this checkbox, and the color that we're going to do is a color already pre-selected, and it's just going to be 16A085. There we go. It's like a nice little green or kind of tealish color. So we're also going to set the border color to the same color as this, and that will do for the checkbox background. And if we select it, now that we have this checked pseudo state selecting that we're going on right here, this is actually toggling with the default checkbox. So let's go ahead and put a comment above here, and we will just say checkbox, and we'll create this next section, and we're just going to name this check mark. So we're going to use, similar to how we use the before pseudo element, we're going to use the after pseudo element. We can actually just copy this, say after, and same thing here. We're going to want to be able to say content blank like that. We'll say display, we're going to put position absolute, and let's just go ahead and start. Let's go ahead and go left 0 and top 0. And even before we do this, let's go ahead and comment these out real quick, just to make sure that we understand this real quick. If I type test into here as well, before we position this absolute, it's actually going to come after the element, whereas the before element's before. So what we want to do is be able to get this test text basically overlap the checkbox that we created and turn it into a check mark using some CSS. So let's go ahead and do that. So position absolute. So now the text is overlapping that box. Now we don't want it to be like that. We're just going to leave it empty like we did before. And we're going to next give it a width of, let's just start with like 10 pixels and a height of 10 pixels just to illustrate what we're doing. And we're going to give it a border bottom 1 pixel solid white. We're just going to use some pixels and then we'll convert them to ems here in a bit. And we'll say border right. Now if we refresh and we click here, we can actually see what we have going on here. And let's go and up these to 2 pixel. So we can see the white little angle here. So we can actually turn this into a checkbox. So what we're going to do, we're going to set the width to, we're going to set it to 12, and we're going to just set this height to, or no, we're going to set the height to 12 and the width to 6 pixels. And if we save that and refresh, now we have this little kind of backwards L. And if we rotate that, which we're going to, it's going to look like a nice check mark. So let's go and do that. We can do that with transform, and we'll use the rotate property, and we'll rotate it 45 degrees. Now if we refresh, we should see a nice checkbox here. And instead of white, let's just go and change this to black to be able to see on more contrast here. So we have this nice check mark. Now we just need to position it. So let's do that inside the browser first and kind of get an idea of how we want to position this. So let's go ahead and pull this up a little bit so we can see what we're doing, and go back into styles here. So let's just go left. Looks like about there, 5 pixels, and top at 0. I think we want about 1 pixel there. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to say left 5 pixels and top 1 pixel. So now that we've got that, let's go and pop open a calculator and convert these all to ems real quick before we continue. So the way that we want to do this is we want to take the value and divide it by 16, which is our base size. And that'll give us the ems that we want for this. Say 1 divided by 16. Go ahead and paste that into there. And 6 divided by 16. And if that's 0.375 m, we'll know that this one should be 0.75 m. And let's go ahead and do, 2 divided by 16, and that'll give us 0.125. And so for these two, we'll just go like that and give it an M. Cool. So that should still look the same as it does here. And let's convert these back to white. Awesome. So now we got this nice little checkbox. Now I converted it to white, but there's still a check there because we're not hiding and removing it based off of the element checked here. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Like we did above, we'll just go ahead and copy this down below. And after, we'll just say checked. So when this is checked, we want to display it, and when it's not, we don't. So we can actually, where this content is, we can just say content none. And then down here, we can just say content, empty string. So it's still there. And if we actually inspect this, and we come into this label here, after the checkbox text here, there's no after, but when we actually select it, it shows up, and that is our nice little checked mark right there. So that's complete. Let's move on to the radios. And the radios are really similar. Actually, one more thing. We should probably get rid of this little check here, huh? So let's get rid of the default check mark before we continue. That would make a lot of sense. We don't want those sitting next to each other. There's a few different ways. We don't want to say display none. Actually, let's go ahead and do a focus real quick on this so that I can illustrate what I'm talking about here. So we'll just say focus, because let's just go into here. So if I tab over this, we get this black outline on this default element to let us know that that element is focused, which we don't want to lose that property. So we want to add a focus on this input text checkbox over here right now. So we can pretty much just copy what we have here. And instead of checked, let's just say focus. And we want to do that on the before element, which is the outline, or with the background element here. And what we're going to do is just give it a box shadow. And we're just going to say 0, 0, 0. And we want 1 pixel here. So we can say 0.0625, which we just did a minute ago. And we're going to use an RGBA value, but we want to use the same value here. So what we can actually do is just come into here, select the before element, and inside of the compute, it will give us what we're looking for, the RGBA or RGB element. And we want to add the A to this. It'll give us the ability to add some opacity, which we're just going to put 0.05. My typing is terrible right now. So if we refresh, now we can see we're getting that nice greenish border on this element when it's focused. So what I was going to illustrate up here is if we just say display none, unfortunately we won't have the ability to focus on the element because it won't be in the page. So there's a few different ways we can handle this, but the best way, or a way I like to do it, the way I think's a pretty solid way of handling this, we can just say position absolute so that we don't have any width or height on it. So we're going to overlap, and then we can actually use this clip. We can clip the element so that there is none of it is actually displaying here. And it's just a nice little easy way of handling this. And so now we have that working, and we can still focus on it, as you can see. So nice, yeah. And so yeah, let's move on to the radio. The radio buttons are going to be super simple. After doing this, they're almost identical with a few changes. So we already have the radio down here. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and start with the radio. So first, we can just grab these two. And I wouldn't recommend just copying and pasting these. You could definitely just add the radio selector to those up there as well. But we can just copy paste those. We don't even need to touch those again. Now the checkbox, basically the outline of the radio button here. We can add a comment there, radio. We'll say radio outline, I guess. And instead of checkbox, let's change these to radio. So if we refresh this now, we're going to have these little boxes, and let's go ahead and keep the default radios in there as we develop, and then we'll get rid of them later. So we can see that we're able to select these. Now there's a few things we need to do here. First, we'll just say border radius 50% so we can make this round. Great. And I don't want to change the background of this, but I do want to just keep that border color for the way we're going to style this at least. And there we go. That looks great. Now we just need to add the little dot, which we can pretty much just copy this checkmark content again. And I wouldn't recommend I would share as much of these rules as you can in your code, production code, but just for this example, I think it helps to break it up. So if we save this, refresh and see what's going on. Oh, one more thing. Let's go ahead and change these to radio. Now we can save and refresh. We can actually see this little check mark, and like I did earlier, let's just go ahead and change these to black so we can see what's going on. So now we just pretty much need to change that check mark to a little dot, right? So let's go ahead and we'll just set it's not going to have the same left and top properties. We already know that. So let's just set top left or the left and the top property to 0. And the width we're going to use on this, we're just going to do like 0.5 em. We're not going to need any border, and we can just go ahead and say background, the same green color we've been using. And let's get rid of that space in front of there. Cool. Perfect. And so next, if we hit a refresh on that, we have a little square there. Let's go ahead and give this the border radius of 50% like we did earlier. So now we just need to center out this circle inside of the outline, this little dot. And instead of check mark, let's call this radio dot. And so it's pretty simple. The width and height of the outline of the outside of the outline is 1 em, and the inside is 1 em. So we know that there's 0.5 em. So we know that there's 0.5 em extra space, and since that's going to be evenly distributed around the dot, all we need to do is set the top or the left and the top to 0.25 em. We can save that. And there we go. Looks great. Let's go ahead and uncomment this radio button hiding rules, and we are done with that. Great. So that's pretty much it for this video. Pretty easy and effective way to handle to handle checkboxes and radios. One last thing we didn't add is we can just add this this focus down here on this radio as well by just changing this to radio. And that's going to give us the same result as that. So we can just focus between them. And yeah, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed. Hopefully this video was useful to you. And yeah.